So thanks to you all for coming tonight on this windy evening. This is the forum for the candidates for the Director of Planning, Development, and Transportation, or as we like to call it, PDT Director. We have 3 great candidates here this evening. And the way this is going to work is I'll run through a set of questions with the candidates, and then we'll leave some time for questions from you all, from the audience. And just as a reminder, we'll bring a microphone to you and make sure that you have the microphone before you start asking your question. So following our question and answer session, we will have a reception in the back, and you all are invited to that. And it's a great chance to meet the candidates one-on-one and have some light refreshments. So with that, we'll get started. I'll start on my left with some brief 3 to 4 minute introductions. So Laurie, if you tell us a little about yourself and your interest in the position.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening, everyone. I'm Laurie Kadrich, and I'm currently the Director for Community Development and Neighborhood Services here at the City of Fort Collins. A little bit about myself. I was raised in the Midwest in the great state of Michigan, the eldest of 5 children, and in a family that really was rooted in small business. So I grew up running cash registers, stocking shelves, and various jobs within the businesses when I wasn't in school. And I had a very large extended family on both my mother's side and my father's side, so my formative years are really rooted in faith and family. And by the time I was ready to graduate from college, I thought, I have got to get away from this place because my life had just been so much about family, and at that time I thought I needed something different. And so I ventured out west. And my plan was, my 5-year plan was get 3 to 5 years experience out west in a new community, in my career field at that time, which was criminal justice, and then go back where I belong with my family. And what happened, I'm sure has happened to others as well, I fell in love with the Rocky Mountains and the rural west area, and for the last 35 years I've been working in the public sector field in the Rocky Mountain West in Wyoming and Colorado in various positions within local government. Over half the time I have been an assistant city manager or a city manager, and then about the other half of my career I was in law enforcement. So my formative years really rooted in faith and family, and then in my public sector years really rooted in community and collaboration. And so my leadership style and my approach to public sector and local government is that we work with staff members, we work with citizens, and we work with elected officials to form the best communities that we can. And I look forward to serving you in this capacity as the Planning, Development, and Transportation Director if I'm offered that position. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. Our next candidate, Wayne. Tell us a little about yourself and your interest in this position.
Thank you, Amy. Before I answer the question, thank you all for coming out.
Could you turn on your mic, please?
Thank you. Before I answer the question, I would like to thank all of you for coming out here tonight. I'm excited and appreciative to be a part of this process with Laurie and Gwen, who I met this afternoon on the city tour. Let me begin by giving you a personal note about who I am. My wife and I moved to Colorado in 1999, and we have 2 beautiful children, both born in Colorado. I attended Texas A&M University, where I earned an undergraduate degree in environmental design, and a few years later I went back to obtain my master's in urban and regional planning. I've been working in municipal government for the past 20 years. During this time, I've obtained experience and training that's instructed me on how to lead and develop employees, oversee programs, services, and departments, and participate effectively on teams. I've applied best management practices to oversee services, to provide quality public assets, as well as to maintain transportation system. I've led community engagement in the real world and have worked with diverse stakeholders to find creative and sometimes practical solutions to pressing local issues. I've acquired the skills necessary to build relationships and partnerships with people, with neighborhoods, with businesses, as well as local, state, and regional agencies. And also, I've developed some leadership skills that have helped me engage with employees so that they're truly excited about what they are doing and serving their community. I've had a rewarding career. I started in Texas and had the opportunity to work in historic preservation. I participated in the creation of a historic district, and I worked for a Main Street program that was really focused on reviving and creating a thriving historic downtown. After arriving in Colorado, I worked for the city of Arvada, and then I started to work for the town of Berthoud prior to beginning work for the city of Centennial in 2006, where I've worked for the past 9 years. In my current role as the deputy city manager, I've been overseeing the community development department and the public works department for the past 2.5 years. The first 6.5 years with the city of Centennial, I was the community development director. I truly enjoy what I do. I've had the privilege to work with great staff and teams to accomplish several achievements and milestones. For example, in the city of Centennial, we've rezoned the entire city to comport with our new land development code, and we did that with great community consensus. We've adopted 6 sub-area plans with the support of the community and our city council. We've improved our snow plowing. We've managed successfully a 3-fold increase in our street maintenance program. And we've completed several neighborhood traffic calming projects in collaboration with the residents, the affected residents in those neighborhoods. I love what I do, and I'm truly passionate about public service. So I do have a great interest in this position. First, I think Fort Collins is an exciting place to be as it is embracing so many goals, such as trying to reduce the impact of the community on the climate, to redevelop the Foothills Mall, which I saw today. It's underway. To balance the interest between future vision and preserving the character of existing neighborhoods, and much more. The term sustainable is common here, but it would be a great opportunity to work for a community that believes in sustainability. So there's at least 4 parts to my interest in this job. One, over the course of my career, I have successfully worked on complex issues that required extensive community outreach, and I would bring that experience to this job. Second, I want to apply my experience to sustain and build collaborative relationships inside the city government, in the community, and in the region. I've worked effectively on public-private partnerships, public-public partnerships, and many other types of partnerships with the private sector. Third, I would thrive working on initiatives that start with a vision and end with making something real. That's the most exciting thing to do, is to start with a vision and a plan, find the pathway to success, and then find it implemented. And we did that on several things in the city of Centennial. One, I would tell you, is Center Park. It started as a concept in our open space master plan as a central gathering place. Today, it's an award-winning park that accommodates numerous community events every year, accommodates family and gatherings and birthdays, allows kids at heart to splash in the water on hot summer days, and much more. That all started with but a simple term in our open space master plan. And fourth, I'm an advocate for accountability in government. I have a long history of providing continuous improvement, innovation, and performance management in the departments that I oversee. So it would be my privilege to serve as the Director of Planning, Development, and Transportation for the City of Fort Collins. Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. All Our next candidate, Gwen, tell us a little about yourself and your interest in this position.
Thanks very much. Boy, those are hard acts to follow. It's great to be here in Fort Collins. We had a great tour today. I learned a lot about the city, and I was very impressed with the progress that you've made on a number of different fronts. I even posted a picture of the level 3 electric charging station you have to my Facebook page, because we don't have those yet in Montpelier, and it would be wonderful if we did. So I'm going to go back and try to get one. They're great. I'm actually from Colorado. I was born here, and I lived in Boulder and Telluride as a little girl. And for me, Colorado was always my dream place to live. We moved east when I was a girl, and I lived in the suburbs of Connecticut and only wanted to get back to Colorado. So I came back and went to college at CU, which was, I discovered this afternoon, the wrong thing to say in Fort Collins. But I loved it there. And I started after CU. I majored in political science and studied environmental policy in particular, and that led me to be an environmental activist for some of my early years. But I learned after doing that it wasn't sufficient just to fight against the things that you didn't think were going right. You really needed to build the alternative. So I went back to graduate school at Brown University, studied public policy, and then I continued in graduate school at the University of British Columbia, looking at how to build a different type of community and a different type of economy. I was also very interested all along in energy issues as well, not so much because of climate change back then, but because of my own deep commitment to nuclear opposition. I started off as a nuclear protester as a young girl, and so I was always looking for new ways to save energy and retrofit homes and reduce the need for these new plants, which of course are very popular in the East. I hope in your net zero city that small nuclear plants aren't in the future. I haven't looked at the entire plan, but I wouldn't recommend that. After graduate school, I ended up working in energy for a while, and that culminated in being the senior planner in the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy Resources, where I helped regulate utilities and enforced the state's energy efficiency requirements for those utilities. So we were requiring them to basically insulate people's homes and help them reduce energy use using a lot of the Exxon overcharge funds. Remember back when we actually prosecuted the antitrusts of the big oil companies? That was a different era than we're in today. But then I got married and we moved to Western Massachusetts, and I worked as a regional planning director for Franklin County, Massachusetts, which is a fairly rural county. And in that county, I was the only planning staff that 23 out of the 26 towns had during this big growth boom that was happening out of Boston. The people were moving out of Boston further and further away because of the escalating real estate values. So these little towns were being overrun with development and needed to manage their growth. So that was my job for about 5 years while I did that, running around from town to town, helping them draft zoning, sometimes for the first time, but certainly the first time they'd ever drafted zoning that was intended to help manage growth. That was a time of great change. Right around then, the Berlin Wall came down, and Madeline Kunin, who was the governor of Vermont, set up an organization called the Institute for Sustainable Communities after she returned from Bulgaria, having witnessed the elections there and seen the really close connection between democracy and the environment in Eastern Europe. And so I moved to Vermont to work for that institute and ended up working in Central and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union for many years on environmental projects and community building projects. I set up environmental management training centers in Bulgaria, Poland, Hungary, Russia, and Ukraine, and developed environmental management training for all different sorts of both government officials and non-governmental organizations throughout the region. It was exciting work. And after a while, with a young son, I was ready to move back to the United States and stay home a little bit more. And lo and behold, my own town in Randolph, Vermont, needed a town manager. So I applied for that job and got it. I'd never been a town manager before. But it was a lot of fun, and I did that for 3 years. They had gone through 6 town managers in 6 years in Randolph, so the fact that I stayed for 3 years was actually a stabilizing force. The next guy that came on stayed for 7, which was great. And while I was a town manager, I supervised a major downtown renovation project. I built, filled, closed, and capped a state-of-the-art line landfill and made the town $3 million in the process. And I also, and this is probably also the wrong thing to say in Fort Collins, I got the train to start stopping there again. Because when I started in Randolph, the Amtrak just ran through town at 60 miles an hour. It was actually kind of a hazard. People would sometimes get hit by it right through the downtown. And I thought it would be great to get the train to stop there again. And since we were doing this downtown renovation project, we could build a new platform as part of that project. So I met up with Amtrak senior management, in some ways by coincidence at the State House, and they agreed to it. So I moved forward to get the new train stop. But then I was recruited by the International City County Management Association to go work in Central Asia with municipalities there who were struggling with some of the new mandates that were coming down, that they had more control over their budgeting and financial management. So I moved to Almaty, Kazakhstan, and I worked with municipalities in those 2 countries for a while until the ruble crashed in Russia, and that really made a mess of the project. And I moved back to the United States and worked with the Institute for Sustainable Communities again, helping the city of Burlington with a long-range sustainability plan for the city and working with communities in Macedonia on local environmental action plans, as well as some other projects. At that point, though, I had been working with the city of Burlington, and I was recruited to be the deputy secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources in Vermont. That's the agency, the state agency that manages all the environmental issues, both the forest and parks, environmental conservation, and fish and wildlife. And that was in the very tail end of the Dean administration. And once he decided to run for president, all of our terms were quite short. So at that point, I left and became a pastor part-time. I had been in divinity school since I came home from Central Asia. And I set up the organization where I work now, Global Community Initiatives, which is an organization, a nonprofit organization that's been around since 2002. And I've worked with municipalities throughout North America, Central Asia, the Central and Eastern Europe communities, and in South Africa and Japan to do sustainability planning and sustainability implementation. A lot of different projects. I'd love to tell you more about that. But then my own town, again, needed a city planning director. And so I applied and worked for the city of Montpelier as their director of planning for 7 years. During that time, I helped the town establish the same goal I've heard you've just adopted, reducing carbon emissions by 80% by the year 2030. That was something that the city set as a goal back when I started a capital city contest between Montpelier and Olympia, Washington, to see which city could be which city that was a state capital could be the first sustainable state capital in the country. So we worked on that contest, and both cities adopted that goal as part of that. And I obtained a big grant from the Department of Energy to build a biomass heating plant in our downtown that now is built and operational and heats our downtown instead of with oil, which is generally the only option in Vermont for large commercial buildings, with biomass and wood chips, which is actually quite a renewable resource in Vermont. Did a lot of other projects as well, including an elder care program using time banks. One thing I should mention is that during this whole time, I've done a lot of writing about the work I've done. I've written now 5 different books, and I'm just finishing another one with Michael Schumann on how to move money into local communities with local investment. So the first book was about how to make sustainable cities. It's called The Key to Sustainable Cities, and there's a companion workbook with that cities all over the world have used now to do sustainability planning. And my latest book, called Creating Wealth, with Bernard Lietaer was actually about how cities can use monetary interventions like complementary currencies to achieve their goals. And that has led me to a lot of interesting work on public banking and complementary currencies as well. So anyway, my time is up, I guess. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, getting ready to roll up our sleeves and dive into some detailed questions on some of the topics that you actually brought up in your introductions. We'll start with Wayne for this question. The City of Fort Collins has a history of not just developing plans, but implementing them. Please share an example of a multifaceted plan that you led and how you followed through on implementation.
So I'll start with talking about the City of Centennial's I-25 sub-area plan. It was a plan just several years ago that we initiated in over 18 months, working with the community. There are neighborhoods that are 3/4 of a mile to a mile off of the interstate to one side, the west side, and the rest of the corridor, particularly to the east of I-25, is predominantly commercial and becomes somewhat industrial in some areas. We know that in Denver, with the investment in light rail and transit, that the I-25 corridor will continue to dramatically change. The city had not yet set its own vision. And so working with the neighborhoods, the property owners, and the businesses in the corridor, we identified appropriate areas for certain types of development. The closer to I-25, the more mixed use, the taller, the more form-based the development could be. Closer to residential, respecting the character of those neighborhoods, we dropped the height and continued more suburban form of development. I'm proud to announce that after that plan was adopted just 2.5 years ago, that Mr. Jones of Jones International approached the city to develop the largest contiguous acres under single ownership along I-25, south of Denver, and north of C-470. There's that Park Meadows Mall down there at C-470 and I-25. He owns over 40 acres right up against the west side of the interstate. And he was committed to leaving a legacy because his business and his career were coming to a close. And so over the past 2 years, we worked with Jones International, even during the planning process, to make sure that their vision, which was mixed use, urban development, would fit in with the community's vision. About 8 months ago, Opus, a large developer in the Denver metro area, broke ground on their proposal to take down this 40-acre property to begin the mixed-use development that the Jones put into place through a rezoning and an adoption of a plan of our council. That particular project is just beginning construction. But right there, you have the sense of starting with but a vision and making something real. And I think to be effective in the public sector, you have to have that community engagement. You have to build consent. It's not making everybody agree, but everybody consenting to there is an issue or there is a problem, and we have to find a solution. So that's an example of a plan that we adopted and how it's being implemented today. And if I would add one more thing. We had to enhance the light rail station, and so the city and the Transportation Management Association, which is a taxing entity, we're funding a light rail extension to service the Jones District, and that's underway. Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. Gwen, please share an example of a multifaceted plan that you led and how you followed through on implementation.
Great, thanks. Thanks. Gosh, there's a few of them, because planning has been what I've done for many years, but a couple stand out. One was an agricultural preservation plan that I led in Franklin County that actually led the people involved in the planning process to help establish the Dairy Compact in New England, which for a while established a surcharge on milk that came into the region, and that went to pay the small family farmers in the region that couldn't afford to keep up with the big farms out in Wisconsin. So that was one thing that really did have some effect over the long term, along with the Deerfield River Management Plan that I developed during that time as well, which was done in the wake of the relicensing of all the dams along the Deerfield River. So we started that planning process knowing that the planning would actually need to be implemented for those dams to be relicensed. So that was a very effective sort of combination of policy and planning that worked really well. But what came to mind when you asked the question was in Randolph with the capital plan, because they'd never had a capital plan before, and God bless them, the small towns just like to pick a number out of the air and throw it at a project that they know needs to be done. And so they would do that. They would say, all right, we're going to improve Highland Avenue next year. Let's put $100,000 toward that, without ever having any engineering or planning or anything done to show that the project would actually cost $100,000. So I organized the town to think about all the capital projects they had in mind and to put it in a plan that could be implemented over time with real numbers and real plans involved. And with the combination of that planning process and the landfill coming up with a profit actually for the municipality, they were able to then use the landfill's surplus to help fund the capital improvements that they wanted to make.
Great. Thanks, Gwen. Laurie, can you please share an example of a multifaceted plan that you led and how you followed through on implementation?
Yes, thank you. The multifaceted plan that I was most involved in is one that happened when I was the city manager in Grand Junction, Colorado. And at that time, Grand Junction was growing quickly, and we were part of Mesa County. And if you're familiar with the area, there's the Palisade, a small town on the east end, and Fruta on the west end, and the Grand Valley lies in the center of that. None of the communities, nor had the county, ever done a comprehensive plan before. And so I approached the county manager, and we approached our elected bodies in developing a county-wide plan for the first time to deal with the urban growth that we were experiencing. And that took several months to get the boards in agreement that we would share cost and share planning and then share an implementation strategy at the end of that process. We worked together with county staff, with the county commissioners and the city council for just about 2 years to develop that comprehensive plan. And then the city of Grand Junction implemented the comprehensive plan through land use code and adopted it by ordinance, and it's still being used today.
Great. Thank you. So the next question, we'll start with Gwen, and it has to do with funding. The PDT budget for this year is nearly $69 million and covers a wide range of services and projects. We're always looking for innovative and creative ways of getting projects done. Please share one example of an occasion where you found additional funding sources to support implementation.
All right, well, funding is us when you're in the planning business, of course. I've raised $30 million for projects that I've been responsible for planning and implementing in my career. And of course, it's the one I mentioned earlier about the district energy plant was perhaps the biggest one that I've done, because that had been a project that had been percolating along in the city for 15 years before I started as the planner. Similar to the way that they were doing capital planning in Randolph, they wanted to do this district project, but they had no sense really of how much it was going to cost. The town had voted a bond of $250,000 for a $20 million project. That was a drop in the bucket, but they thought that that was going to be enough to run the pipe to the plant that they hoped the state would build, actually. So I found this funding from the Department of Energy and worked with the state to match it so that the plant could actually be built. And the funding source was very competitive. It was a national competition, but we won the largest grant, even in the smallest state capital. They gave us more money than they did to Sacramento and some of the other candidates that had applied for the money at the time. So that was one example, but there are a lot of ways that municipalities can be creative and innovative, and that's one of the things I've been working on for the past year, working with cities like Seattle and Santa Fe, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, on public banking and looking at how lending and revolving funds and the kind of banking functions that municipalities do can produce a revenue stream for local governments that can help them fund important public priorities.
Great. Thank you, Gwen. Coming back up to Laurie, can you share an occasion where you found additional funding sources to support implementation?
A couple of examples come to mind for me, and they're more public-private or public-nonprofit partnerships. And one was when I was the city manager in Cody, Wyoming. The community had long desired to build a recreation center and was not able to fund it out of the revenues that they had. And so we formed a partnership with the local recreation district and then approached a couple of nonprofits that actually came in 25% of the funding for the facility. And with the 4 different entities, we were able to develop enough funding and an operating plan to open a community recreation center, convention center, and skate park in one facility. And that project speared a redevelopment of the community library in the same area and a private donation to build a central park that connected the two. So that took about 5 years, and we leveraged lots of different financial sources. And then the other one was a negotiation that I worked on while I was in Grand Junction to bring the Rockies minor league baseball team to the community. And that was a very complicated process and involved negotiating funds and dollars and facility support from the Colorado Mesa University, the school district, local nonprofit baseball organization that had been in the community for years, different taxing mechanisms, as well as funding from the city's accounts. And so both of those were leveraging dollars that we could find within the community to create something greater than any one of the entities could have done on their own.
Great. Thanks, Laurie. And now to Wayne.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Amy. So I'll give 2 examples. One is the city, in its open space master plan, has identified several corridors that are extremely important to close the gaps on the trail system. And so in 2010, the city worked with a local metropolitan district that overlapped this one particular corridor, in which we had a long-standing homestead family holding out on selling the land along the stream. And so the Metro District had a relationship with the owner, but needed assistance in acquiring the property as well as doing stream reclamation. So they came to the city, and through a collaborative effort, we acquired the property for about $3.4 million, splitting that cost. The Metro District, with its residents in the area, was eager to fund the cost to stabilize the stream at just about $5 million. The city helped with the 1 mile of trail through the property, as well as native restoration to the habitat. It had been overgrown with noxious weeds. And so from 2010 to 2012, in partnership with the Metropolitan District, the county, which provided grants for open space, and the city's funding, we were able to make public a piece of land that would have otherwise probably stayed in private hands for decades, as homestead families and ranchers often do. The second project is one that's actually underway. It's a Arapahoe road widening. It's a 1.5 mile stretch of a 2-lane road that is on each end bookend by 6-lane arterial roadway. So this 2-lane section is long overdue for widening. And so the city needed partnerships to make a $15 million project possible. We brought $10 million to the table through our elected leaders and through our good staff in public works. We approached the county. The county stepped up and added an additional $2.4 million to the project to help us get this project funded. We also went to the Stormwater Authority. It offered up $500,000 in improvements. And the city of Aurora, which generates most of the traffic, was kind enough to give us another $500,000. And so through a collaborative effort through multiple governments, we've been able to fund this project. And the construction will start in about the next 60 days. It's a project that failed 3 times previously to get started, and that's why this 2-lane road has stayed a 2-lane road, but the bookends have long since been 6-lane facilities. Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. Okay, moving on to our next question. I think we're starting back up with Laurie. So Fort Collins is a great place to live, regularly receiving accolades and landing on top 10 lists. Because of this, more people are moving to our community every year, which can have both positive and negative impacts on the quality of life. What would be your approach to managing the negative impacts of growth and development?
Well, thank you for the question. That's one of the responsibilities that I've had most during the last 3 years as I've served as the Community Development and Neighborhood Services Director. Because in both of those divisions, community development, we've been dealing with increased intense and dense development within our community. Although that was planned through our city plan process, it is some of the largest and most intense development projects that the community has seen. So now it is being built, and we are dealing with the reaction of the community. In addition to that, neighborhood services responds to a lot of the concerns that are expressed by residents that live in those various areas. So how I've approached it since I've been here is to be more transparent with what is actually occurring. And we've implemented a number of different ways to get information out to the community so that they're aware of various projects that are going through the planning or the development process. In addition to that, we have changed our public outreach so that we work differently with citizens who are affected by these projects. We spend more time with developers in trying to meet some of the concerns expressed by citizens. And over the last few years, we have rewritten significant portions of the code to help minimize the impact of intense and dense development where those areas are closely adjacent to established single-family residents, and/or looked at other kinds of transportation and support services concerns. So for me, it's first being transparent with what's happening within the community, having open and honest dialogue with stakeholders who are affected by whatever's coming through, sharing the information with both parties or many parties in some cases, and then trying to reach consensus on a project that is best for the community and fits and aligns with the vision of city plan.
Thank you, Laurie. Wayne, what would be your approach to managing the negative impacts of growth and development?
Well, one, it takes a community to handle both the positive and the negative impacts from growth. So there's a saying, fail to plan, plan to fail. And so I think the first thing that a community that is willing to take on growth has to do is it has to put plans in place. So there's land use plans, there's transportation plans, there's park recreation, open space master plans, and the list goes on. There's financial planning. So a community has to be committed to planning. It has to be committed to community engagement. The ability for everyone to sit at the table in that inclusive decision-making, to have not necessarily a say in what the final outcome is, but a voice that informs the decision-makers what the community is concerned about, needs, and desires. And so community engagement, I think, is a large part of that. With growth comes things like congestion, and so a city has to be ready to invest in its assets. And so you have a capital improvement plan, you have an intelligent transportation system to deal with congestion, and as times change, your regulations should change. Your services should change, and your programs to address what is happening in the community today. So I would work very closely with staff members, with other departments, and other agencies, both governmental and non-governmental, to try to address those negative impacts, both foreseen and unseen. Thank you.
Thank you. Gwen?
Thanks. Well, it's interesting. I think if you start with the assumption that Fort Collins wants to grow, then you need to do everything that the two prior candidates have said. You need to be transparent. You need to work with stakeholders. You make a commitment to planning. You have to think about higher intensity because sprawl is expensive. Having more and more pieces of infrastructure spread over the acreage with less and less ratepayers and taxpayers per linear foot of pipe and road and other things means that over the long run those systems are going to be bankrupt because you can't raise enough money from all the users to support sprawl. So my approach might be to ask the question, how much growth do we want? Not to just assume that growth is good. Because we've certainly seen cases where cities that were really hospitable, livable, and affordable have grown beyond what that base can support. And think about what kinds of growth management we might want to do as a city to try and both intensify it in specified areas so that it doesn't cost the taxpayers and ratepayers lots and lots of money over time, but also to regulate it so that it isn't just uncontrolled growth beyond what the citizens that live here want to accommodate.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to ask one more question and then bring it out to the audience. Have you got your thinking caps on? Just a few minutes. So the next question, I believe we're starting with Wayne. Good, thank you. Over the next year, we want to spend more time making sure our neighborhoods have the opportunity to be engaged in what is going on in their area. Can you share any experience you have had working with neighborhood associations or other frameworks you would recommend to support this process?
Yes, I can. So one approach is, in working with neighborhoods my entire career, is that you have to be able to communicate with neighborhoods. And we have established neighborhoods that did not have active HOAs, and they are very difficult to find. It is very difficult to find in those types of neighborhoods a group that represents the whole area. And then you have neighborhoods that have active HOAs and management companies, and they're much easier, at least, to get in contact with an HOA board member or a management company contact. And so what's very important is that you have a map of the neighborhoods in your community. And that, such as in the Community Development Department, we reached out to every single neighborhood and we identified HOA boards, management companies, and where none existed, we worked with the active citizens from those neighborhoods. There's some that formed civic associations, not homeowners associations, and we were able to work with those civic associations. I'd also say that Centennial's very fortunate to have an umbrella organization that represents many neighborhoods in the city, older neighborhoods and newer neighborhoods. It's called the Centennial Council of Government of Neighborhoods, or CENCON. And so over the course of my 9 years with Centennial, we have held workshops with neighborhoods to educate them on how to review development plans. We've held walking tours of their neighborhoods to help educate them on what codes we do have and what issues, therefore, we can address in their neighborhoods and which ones we cannot. And in those instances, we open dialogues between their council members and the neighborhoods so the council members understand there's something we can't do for this neighborhood and they want a voice with you. So it is very important to engage the neighborhoods, to create avenues of communication, to be open and responsive to them when they do call, so that neighborhoods have an opportunity to have a say in what's happening around their neighborhoods.
Thank you. Gwen, can you share any experience you have had working with neighborhood associations or other frameworks you would recommend to support this process?
Sure. My ground rule for community engagement is that it's important for the city to go to the community and not always to expect the community to come to the city. It's really important for all of us to be out there in the neighborhoods, having our meetings in the neighborhoods and talking to them that way. So I've engaged in a lot of different processes, all sort of structured around what gets people excited about getting together and coming to meetings. They get excited about competitions. They get excited about things their children are doing. They get excited about their faith communities. They get excited about parties and music. So the more fun and types of activities you can add to the mix when you're working with people in the neighborhoods to make it an event that people want to go to anyway, instead of just being, oh yeah, we got to go talk about the city's master plan, which, you know, for a few of us, that's interesting, but for the vast majority, not so much. Now, when I moved to Montpelier, they didn't have neighborhood associations. There was just one neighborhood that sort of self-identified and had some communication among itself, but the rest of the city was just a big sort of no neighborhoods there. So I set up neighborhood associations using a crisis, actually, to help trigger the process, because back, you remember, I think several years ago, when heating oil went from $2 a gallon to $4 a gallon, we were worried that some of the elders in our community wouldn't be able to afford to eat over the winter because of all the things they were paying, all the money they were paying to heat. So we used that eventuality as a spark to get neighborhood associations going. So we would get people looking out for their neighbors a little more effectively. And it was very effective. The first meeting we had, the hall was packed. Hundreds of people turned out that said, yes, I'm willing to help set up this neighborhood association and work with my neighbors, both to keep an eye on people that need help, but also to come up with some other alternatives for having to spend so much energy. So we use the neighborhood associations to get out the word about energy efficiency and different types of insulation that they could put in and the programs that they could access if they were struggling with money that year. And like in Centennial, we set up a citywide association called the Capital Area Neighborhoods. And that group meets monthly now to talk about issues both within the neighborhoods and that the neighborhoods share with the entire city. During the time we established it, I also got the city council to actually hold some of their meetings in the neighborhoods. And when we were going through the master planning process and the new zoning process, we went out to each neighborhood and talked about what their concerns were with the plan and with the zoning and what kinds of changes they thought needed to be made to the plan and the zoning that would meet their neighborhood's character and issues.
Thank you, Gwen. Laurie?
Yes, I'm going to focus on the experience that I've had here. Fort Collins has a rich history of engaging neighborhoods and building neighborhood plans, and they've done a wonderful job. But as we've continued to intensify in our development and broaden the work that's being done in the community in many different ways, neighborhoods are asking for more. And I believe that the vision in the future is to move beyond notice areas that define neighborhoods and look at geographic areas that make sense for boundaries of neighborhoods, whether that's historic preservation areas or transportation districts or subdivisions that have similar housing types and mixes. And that then those areas could be identified and routinely, not in times of just a crisis, but routinely engage with city staff and other community leaders to talk about things that they might be able to share across the city. What's an effective practice in one neighborhood and how could that help another geographic area out? It could evolve into budgeting tools where there's a certain amount of money available for infrastructure. What does that geographic area think is important, or what is the highest priority for that area? It could be a planning tool. We're embarking on using Nextdoor and other social media to connect with neighbors in a way that we haven't before, but I still think that there's room to look geographically at the community and create stronger systems so that there's regular contact with neighborhood groups and not just in times of a crisis or when the city wants something. And I wanted to close this answer by going back to the second part of the question that I was asked in the beginning. What is my interest in this position? I'm very interested in becoming the next Director of Planning, Development, and Transportation, and primarily because I have had an opportunity for the last few years to observe the city leadership, the elected officials, the growth and vibrancy of the community. I'm working with the PDT team, and I want to continue being able to do that and live and work and raise my family in this community.
Thank you. Great responses. So can I see a show of hands? Who has questions in the audience? How many do we have? And 1, 2, 3 so far. Okay. Mark, can you? I think Jerry's hand was up first. Is it on?
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it works. First is welcome to Fort Collins and making it to the final. I have a question I'd like to ask, and just a short answer would be fine with good examples. How would you build trust, respect, credibility of your department to the citizens, the business community, the university community?
Who would like to jump in?
I'll start.
Okay.
Sure. Trust, respect, and credibility are the currency of city government. Without them, you can accomplish nothing. And the way to build them is through transparency, so that people know what's going on in city government, through accountability and follow through, so that we do what we say we're going to do, and then we measure it, and then we show people how we did what we said we were going to do. And through engagement, because ultimately city government serves the people. And the people's voice needs to be heard, and they need to understand how their voice was heard and how it has affected policy for it to be credible. You know, to have hearings and get lots of input and then walk away and do what you were planning to do all along is the fast way to eroding trust and credibility in a community. And so that's why when I said before that my version of citizen engagement is the city going to the people instead of always expecting the people to come to the city, that works on multiple levels. It needs to be robust two-way communication that is always open, always transparent, and always recognizing the valuable contribution of everybody in the community. In some of the processes I've been in, some of the best ideas have come from the children that have participated in our process. And so you need to train the staff and train the officials to recognize that everybody has some input, and it all needs to be valued, respected, and deeply listened to.
Thank you for the question. So I will repeat some of what Gwen said because I agree with it. In public service and in business, relationships are built on respectful, honest, open, inclusive, and responsive communication. It's just like me and my neighbor. If I say I'm going to mow his yard, I mow his yard. If I don't mow his yard, that relationship, that credibility is lost. And so it starts right there. So that if a neighborhood calls my department or the city and they need something, they will get a response. We are often able to tell them we can do that. It's equally important to tell somebody when you cannot do that. That's the honest communication. I think also what's very important to build that credibility, trust, and respect in the community and with residents is to create a staff and teams within the organization who are engaged. That means that they love what they do and they are committed to making this a better community. Because those are the kind of employees who don't just look at the letter of the law or look at a fine and say, sorry, you're subject to it. They look at the intent and they realize there's a better way of doing something. So they invent, they take ownership, and they become very accountable for the services that they render, and sometimes for the services somebody else renders and helping them out. So that's how I would go about it.
Thank you. Laurie?
For me, I would absolutely agree with what my colleagues have said here today, and add to it that how I mentor others in this area is that it's one opportunity at a time. And each and every day, we all have opportunities at every level of the organization to create trust, to create credibility, or to undo those things. And I spend a lot of time coaching and mentoring on these topics and areas. I include this work within the strategic planning that I do within the department, and we establish shared goals around leadership at all levels in order to ensure that the trust and credibility that we've been extended by the city management, staff, and leadership, as well as the elected officials, gets aligned through all levels of the organization. And so for me, it's one opportunity at a time.
Great. Thank you. Now we had a few others. There.
Hi. My question relates to the rather rapid change that's occurring in Fort Collins, and one of the toughest questions I think the city's going to have to answer is what do we do about our existing neighborhoods as those neighborhoods change, grow, and infill, and that change occurs? How can we maintain the quality of life in the community?
So maintain quality of life in the community, in the neighborhoods. It's up for grabs again. Related to infill development and change in particular. Thank you.
Well, I can start on that one. I think that that is a really difficult question, because if we look at some of the city plan itself and other sub-area plans, there are significant changes to some of the existing neighborhoods. Then there are other areas of the city that the existing neighborhoods stay much as they are today. And so for me, it's continuing to have the dialogue that is the plan that was adopted in 1997, the same vision that we have for the community today, and making sure that we are regularly updating with our current community, our current elected officials, and our current residents about what that vision is for our community. I also think that there are things that we can do from land use codes and implementation strategies that help minimize those transition areas between where there may be more intense development to where there is less intense development. And that while the city of Fort Collins has adopted some in the last few years, there may be room for additional implementation tools. And certainly we're looking at that right now with the discussion around the downtown plan.
Great, thank you. Gwen?
That's a great question, because infill in particular can be a really difficult issue in neighborhoods that want to preserve their character. Neighborhood character is a double-edged sword, too, because sometimes it can be used to keep out things that the city really needs, like affordable housing. And sometimes it can be used to intensify things in ways that are actually fairly in keeping with the neighborhood character and with what the city needs. So again, I think looking at your neighborhoods, getting them involved, helping them understand what the implications are of overprotecting the neighborhood, while at the same time looking at creative ways to make those transitions easier. One of the items in our tour today was this cute little neighborhood of very small homes that was an older neighborhood built right across the street from a new development that had been put in for student housing. Very high intensity development, 5-story buildings, big block buildings. And there was quite a sharp contrast between the cute little residential area and those large, intensive student structures. But even though there was a contrast, the difference to me anyway wasn't so extreme as to radically change the neighborhood, but I could see how the people in the small houses might not like that very much. So if there are values in your neighborhoods that the people there feel are really important to preserve, like some type of historic character that would be destroyed with a lot of modern infill buildings. There are ways to do infill that protect that historic character. There's ways to do infill that don't destroy the existing character of the buildings, but that do help the city intensify in a smart way so that, again, you're not impoverishing yourselves in the future with perpetuating sprawling infrastructure. Hope that helps answer your question.
Wayne?
So to add what Laurie and Gwen have said, we talked earlier about failing to plan and plan to fail. So here it gets back to, in areas with infill development happening, I'd expect the community, like Fort Collins has, to put those plans in place. And knowing that those plans went through a very inclusive decision-making process where everybody had an opportunity to have a voice. That what's very important is for those residents in those infill areas to have some predictability as to how that change will happen. So if a plan says a certain area will develop differently than its historical pattern, then the residents should have some assurance that there's a public process as that change occurs. So they're continued to be at that table to know when something's happening and what's changing. And so there's, I think, that balance of interests as areas change, that you have to be honest with some people who feel that their neighborhood is changing and they don't like that. But at least you've been open and honest with them so that they understand how that area will change and if and when they'll be part of that process.
Thank you. I know we had at least one more question from the audience. Great.
Good evening. I have a question. One of the three of you will inherit an incredible staff. That said, it's been said that the definition of a manager or a director is one who sets goals and reaches them through the efforts of other people. Please describe your style as a manager, how you will get things done with this incredible staff, and give some examples, please. Thank you.
So, management style, incredible staff, thank you, and how you will get things done. Wayne, okay. Great. Wayne's going to start us
It
off.
is my turn.
Yeah.
So my management style is very inclusive. A manager, the root word for manager is hand. For leader is guide. And so the director of PDT is more of a leader than he or she is a manager. The PDT director is not the technical expert in the areas that he or she oversees. So the PDT director has to encourage the entire staff to be engaged in what they do. And so in my inclusive management style, I ask for everybody to understand what is their role in the department. How do they contribute to the larger picture? How do I get things done with staff? I make it very clear that I don't do their job and that I expect them to think about how they can do that business process better, how they can serve a customer more efficiently. If there's an opportunity to do things at lower costs, at the same, if not higher quality, I will embrace those ideas. And so it's very important that the employees know that they are appreciated, that their opinion matters, that in fact, when they express that opinion, oftentimes management will implement that suggestion because, again, the PDT director is not the technical expert or the person performing the work, but has to have the staff that can do that. There you are.
Thank you. Gwen?
Sure, I'll go next. One of the basic rules of running a good organization is getting the right people to begin with and having really good people on your staff. And it sounds like here you've got that to start with, which is wonderful. I tend to agree that looking at it as a manager, managers know how to do things better. Leaders know how to do better things. And so the management style that I've had throughout my career has been a servant leadership style, where I work with my staff to see what I can do in my position to make their job work better and make them more productive. Because it's true, as the manager, as the head of a department, as the head of a multi-department area, you're not always the technical expert on what needs to go on. You do need to understand well what everybody's doing. And this is why when I was assigned the building code department in Montpelier, I went out and learned how to be a building inspector, because I knew that I would be a better supervisor for the barrage of complaints that come in from people who are having building code questions enforced on them if I understood the technical issues. Same with floodplain management. When I was assigned the floodplain department, I went out and took the exam and passed the exam to be a floodplain manager so that I could help them do their job more effectively. Servant leadership isn't always what people like, because often people really want a boss who's going to tell them what to do. And I'm not a micromanaging boss at all. If people are doing their job and doing it well, again, I try to help them do it. I don't look over their shoulder and micromanage and second guess them. I also carry on in the same way I just described it, how it takes to build trust and credibility. Because when you're working with staff, it's the same as working with citizens. You have to be transparent, you have to be accountable. When you tell them you're going to do something, you have to get it done. And you have to be their advocate. That's one of the roles I actually, even though it sometimes causes problems, I enjoy. I enjoy going to upper management and standing up for my staff and saying, look, you know, this thing that you think about them isn't necessarily right, and here's why. But in order to do that, I have to be engaged with them. I have to have them feel like part of a team, and that we're all peers, not hierarchically organized all the time, but that we all contribute our best skills to this shared enterprise.
Thank you. Laurie?
Well, let me first just say that I agree wholeheartedly that the PDT team is a high-performing team. And when I think about myself serving as the director, it is absolutely in a position of leadership as opposed to managing the technical operations of that service area. And the way that I lead is through collaboration and by situational leadership. And what I mean by that is I want to be part of solutions and share information with the folks that I work with and who work for me. So I would see my job, one of my principal jobs, as being a conduit of the information that's coming from the elected officials, from the community, and then sharing that information throughout the PDT organization. In addition to that, a principal job would be to get the resources for the folks who are working in planning, development, and transportation so that they can build the world-class transportation and development systems that are needed for our community as we go forward. And so I would envision a particular emphasis to make sure that we are resourced adequately for the next 5 years in the community, and use that positional authority to work with the executive team and with the community to ensure that we have the proper resources to build the infrastructure that's needed here, as well as support the team that's in place. Another area that I would focus on is that Fort Collins has a very strong reputation for being innovative and being best in class, or cutting edge, or whatever words you want to use for staying one step ahead of other communities. And as such, I would see that if I were selected as director, my role would be to ensure that we are still learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I would expect that others on the PDT leadership team would continue to learn about their profession, their areas of expertise, go out and visit other communities, find out what's happening in the world, in our region, in our nation, and bring those great ideas back and build upon them so that we continue to be the strong team that we are and deliver world-class services to our community.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for great questions. We're going to go ahead and close out with a special lightning round. Obviously, this is going to be a tough choice. We have wonderful, very strong candidates here. So I'd like to offer each of you a chance for like a 30-second elevator speech, maybe a haiku if you're so inclined, why we should choose you to be the next PDT director. Laurie, I think it's your turn to start.
Well, I love it. I love working here. I've had an opportunity to observe the current PDT director and the great work that she's done in building a solid team and meeting the community expectations. I feel like I have a similar skill set that I can continue the good work that she has done, and yet I also bring other skills and abilities and experience to the table that can help grow the service area and the employees within there, and I want to be part of the work that's going on in Fort Collins. I love the community and believe that I have the experience, skills, and communication skills to do the job.
Thank you. Wayne?
I believe I am capable of doing this job because my strengths and experience would serve me well in it. Having worked with diverse services, many of which are in the PDT department, I understand the business that it delivers. Working effectively with staff, neighborhoods, businesses, and other governmental and quasi-governmental agencies is an important part of this particular position. And I've a proven record of doing that. I have a successful track record of community engagement, and I know that this department in so many ways has to be engaged with the community. And so the PDT director has to be capable of and understand community engagement, and I can do that. I would love to work here because it is also a great place to live, and Laurie has said that well, so I'm not going to repeat that. But it is a great place to raise a family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. Gwen?
Well, I love Colorado, and I've been very impressed with the progress that Fort Collins is making on a number of fronts that are dear to my heart, so I know I would love working here. We live in rapidly changing times. The economy is changing, the environment is changing, the climate is changing, the city is changing. And so understanding what it takes to manage change and act and learn and plan in a rapidly changing environment is actually a different exercise today than it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago even. And I've written a lot about this and studied a lot about how communities can be resilient and how to make Fort Collins a resilient, innovative community that rolls with the change and grows with the change and succeeds with the change instead of being overwhelmed by it. That's my skill, and I think I would be well served to use it here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our candidates. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you.